The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
It's well known that the largest volume of apartments get rented on September 1st. So if you're a rental housing provider who has missed the September 1st market, this could be a cause for concern on different levels. Today we'll hear from Boston Pad's CEO Demetrios Salpoglou, who will give us his advice on how to navigate through this challenge. We'll also talk about how technology can be used to reduce the risk of vacancy and how housing policy throughout the state can help us provide more housing, including affordable housing. We hope you'll enjoy this conversation, which begins right now. Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA. We'd like to welcome you to episode 11 of our series about housing policy, property rights, and all things real estate. I'm pleased to welcome back Mr. Demetrios Salpoglou. Demetrios is a housing advocate, a property owner, and a broker. He's the CEO of Boston Pads, and he's been a consistent panelist on our program for the majority of our episodes thus far. I know you're a busy guy, but I thank you for coming back today.
Thanks for having me.
As always, SPOA has been committed to being there for property owners to answer their questions and address their concerns, whether those be about pending policy proposals or subjects that we're going to address today, like how best to rent and manage your properties. I just want to remind all of you to donate to SPOA. You can do this by going to spoa.com/join. Again, that's www.spoa.com/join. When it comes to giving you monthly newsletters, programming like this, advocating for you at government hearings and in the media, we've always been front and center to protect your property rights, and therefore, as the new year approaches, gradually, we're going to need your help more than ever. So please donate at www.spoa.com/join. And with that, we're going to be talking about how to reduce the chances of keeping a vacancy if you haven't rented your apartment by the September 1st deadline. And Demetrios, I'll hand it over to you. How common is this problem? Do you see a higher frequency of this now compared to last year or the year before? And what advice would you give to property owners?
Well, thank you, Amir, first and foremost. Those are three important questions that I'd probably want to unpack systematically. So to answer what we're seeing, we saw a higher vacancy rate this year than the previous 2 years leasing cycle. So basically all the way back to the pandemic. And part of that, I think, is that it's been pretty easy because of the low supply that we had, which created people sitting in their apartments for a longer period of time. And so this was like the first year where it loosened up quite a bit. The rents went up quite a bit. And what happened was, I think people started looking and saying, well, maybe this is the year I take a jump, or they were tired of their apartment. And then we had a really, really soft August. And I don't think that was expected by anybody. Normally, we see a pretty strong August leasing cycle for September 1st, but the customers just weren't there for a number of reasons. And so I think that landlords have to be cognizant of their pricing, and they also have to be cognizant of their leasing cycle and their lease renewal dates. So we probably have to unpack that by neighborhood. And that's probably for a longer conversation, but the general gist of it at 50,000 square feet is that different neighborhoods have different lease renewal notification dates, and they peak. There's almost like a 12-week cycle in each neighborhood that you can see the actual web server traffic. You can actually see the availability spiking. And that's probably when you want to get out your apartments, when most of those people are looking in those neighborhoods. So What I think happened was it was a confluence of factors that led to landlords getting out some of their properties a little bit later. Maybe they were a little bit out of, landlord game shape, as we call it, notifications or whatever. And then coupled with the fact that some of the lease renewal notification dates had changed in different neighborhoods, coupled with the fact that people had been in apartments for a longer period of time, and then we're starting to look for something else.
That's interesting. Can you specify a bit more on those lease notification processes that you were talking about?
Sure. So every neighborhood has different, peak lease renewal notification dates. And so South Boston could be vastly different than, say, an area closer to Boston College, than, say, Cambridge itself, than Charlestown. So you have to kind of look at it and look at peak time of when the majority of landlords have their lease renewal notification dates. That's when they reach out to the tenants and ask them if they're staying or going. And then they give them a bit of time to answer, and then they bring those to market. Now, a lot of that has been timed out with different factors, some of it having to do with the professional market, some of it having to do with proximity to universities, and each one's unique, and each of them fire off. So if you've missed 40 or 60% of the peak traffic coming through that neighborhood, your chances of finding the best tenant are less, or the most qualified tenant are less. And also, then if you slip into, let's say, August, and there's not a strong market of August that shows up for September 1st, you could be dramatically reducing your rents and chasing a falling knife.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed that in certain parts of Boston, even if you can't fill your apartment on September 1st, you have a pretty good to decent chance of doing so in October, November, or January, because there are people who move to the city to start new jobs at the beginning of the new year in January. However, it's not always that way. And I'm thinking, is it possible that in some parts of Massachusetts or within certain neighborhoods in Boston, it's easier to fill apartments after September 1st, whereas in other parts, it might be more difficult to do that? And when it comes to analyzing different micro neighborhoods, are there any specific parts of the city where it would be more challenging? And what advice would you have for those specific owners beyond what we've already discussed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So aggregately, I would say the majority of landlords do not want to go into September, October, November, December with a vacancy. They don't. And there's multiple reasons for that. Most of it we look at in terms of aggregate web traffic across, the greater Boston area, and there's just not as many people looking. There's not as many leads. They're in that bigger cycle of September 1st to September 1st. So what occurs for nearly, almost all of it is September, October, November, and December. You're seeing price reductions and landlords range finding, trying to figure out where the marketplace is, what incentives they need to do to get that apartment rented. Now, there are areas in the city that are more competitive than others. And, as Boston Pads looking at the entire 128 belt, you're going to see these anomalies in different neighborhoods based on, a confluence of factors. Bedroom sizes, areas, proximity to work, proximity to universities. And so they'll always be the one-offs. But if we're talking in big buckets, you don't want to land, or you don't want to have your product coming out in that shoulder season.
And does it make a difference if you are advertising a studio apartment versus a one bedroom or a two bedroom?
Yeah, so studios, one beds, two beds are always going to be the easiest to rent in the off season. And generally speaking, bigger bedroom apartments come out earlier than smaller bedroom apartments, because it's more people that need to make a decision. Landlords are aware of this, they're cognizant of it, and property managers are cognizant of it. So you'll generally see, each calendar year, bigger bedroom apartments always come out earliest in the year.
Mm-hmm. And if you are trying to rent a commercial space, any trends there?
Well, in terms of like commercial, I think that it's a whole different, ball of wax, and we're
Mm-hmm.
not really looking at that as something that has a huge impact from a renter's perspective. But in terms of that's more of a business oriented decision, and that's probably based on what's going on in the current economic crisis. I mean, current economic environment, whether there's crisis there or it's a great economy. I think that plays a bigger role in commercial leasing.
Mm-hmm. Recently, within the past month, you wrote an article on the Boston Pad's website about this issue, the challenge of avoiding vacancy after September 1st. And within it, you outlined a certain number of steps that property owners should take to reduce the chance that they'll have a vacancy at that time. Could you please walk us through some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that to even go a little bit before that, it's a lot easier to reduce a vacancy happening on September 1st by being cognizant of your rents, hyper cognizant of your rents, and what your asking rent is in July and in August. And so what we notice quite a bit with landlords is they'll call in, it's a little bit late, the market has come down, and so let's say their apartment's at $3,000, but the market on that two bed is 2,600 because it's dropped down. Well, they're like, well, take me down to 2,800, but the market's still lower than that and dropping. And so sometimes what happens is they keep dropping it by $50 or $100, but the market keeps sliding down. So in many instances, it's better to do one big jump and get rented right away, jumping to where the puck or skating to where the puck would be and getting rented. Because usually what happens after September 1st is you've gone all the way through August. Now you're vacant in September, and you're still reducing your price going into the fall. So if you had done like maybe a larger or more effective price cut back in August, you probably wouldn't be vacant in September. So, but suffice to say, you didn't reduce your price. You didn't get your place rented. Now you're in September 1st. Well, what do you do then? Well, I think the first thing you do is you go to your property and you look at it and you do an honest assessment of what it is that you need to do to make it competitive with the marketplace. And chances are you probably had a messy tenant there. It's probably my guess. And they probably, maybe they were there a long time and there's some wear and tear, and you remember it as being beautiful because you renovated it 10 years ago, and it probably was. But you probably have some work to do. And even doing some simple upgrades, maybe resanding the floors or painting or putting in new light fixtures or just doing some basic, TLC that can provide that opportunity where it shines in the best light amongst its competitors. Now, the first thing that I would say, no matter what, is go look at it and at minimum get the place, do a professional cleaning to make it look good. But at the same time, really take a good look at maybe some of the things that you've put off. Maybe it's that old white refrigerator or that old white dishwasher. You've had it there 15, 20 years. It's kind of not really in style anymore. And maybe a good thing to do is not make that mistake and buy that same color, but go with a more flashier model. Spend maybe $100, $200 more, $300 more on each appliance. And so it kind of stands out. And it's
stainless steel, right? Everybody loves stainless steel now.
Yeah. I mean, I've had, tons of tenants, and you see these different, things, you hear from your agents, if that landlord would just get rid of those, old appliances, I think I could rent this. And so a lot of times I'll call on behalf of agents because they've said they've had the conversation with the landlord, but they don't believe it because they've rented it the same way for 15 years. And I'm like, yes, you have, but it's time you're vacant. It's time to move on. This is what some customers suggested. the other thing that you can do is, if you're a landlord, is talk to the agent and say, look, okay, I want $2,000 for my one bed. And the agent's like, yeah, but you have, an old kitchen. Would you do, if you put in a new kitchen, would you do 2,200? Because I think I have some higher end clients than what you're asking for that might want to take it if you provided a new kitchen or maybe a new bathroom. And I'm just giving you guys examples here, but there are ways to negotiate up with, and there's some really, there's agents that are really good, that focus and specialize in apartment leasing, and they know the marketplace. They're looking at all the comparatives. They're showing properties at scale all day, and that's their bread and butter. And they may see something in another apartment that they may suggest to you or send pictures of and say, if you did this, you would get this because I just rented this at this price. And so I think it's important for a new, or I should say, an experienced landlord that maybe doesn't have, a new or experienced, I should say, that doesn't have the breadth of scope of the marketplace to know what's going on in real time. And so I think it's incumbent upon them to maybe reach out to 2 or 3 agents and get some feedback on what would help rent it.
That's very good. And I've heard from a number of people, and I've been in this situation myself, trying to turn over units that the previous tenant has already left and the owner wants to make updates. But in certain situations, let's say if you have to renovate the bathroom, or do something major, you don't have enough time from the moment the unit becomes vacant to the time the next tenant is due to come, let's say on the 1st of September. And so there have been situations where owners have had to convince tenants to stay somewhere else until the renovations could be done. And obviously you're in a rush to do a good job, but to also get everything prepared so the tenant can move in by either September 1st or as close as possible. And, sometimes it's just really hard to get everything done within that time crunch. Do you have any advice for people in those types of situations? For example, would you recommend that they prorate the rent for the month that the new tenant is supposed to get there, depending on how many days the tenant won't be able to live in the unit, for example?
Yeah, we see scenarios like that play out all the time. And some of the times we'll have let's just call it, the apartment is obsolete in terms of what the broader apartment leasing universe is looking for. So if I could unpack that, like a 5-bed, 1-bath, or a 4-bed, 1-bath, as an example, those are really hard to rent, and you don't get top dollar for that. There's especially, young professionals, they're very busy. They all go to work at about the same time, and it's hard to have a line at the bathroom, get ready for work, 5 days a week, right, at the same time, right? So, the landlord's already losing money, whether they realize it or not. And so, one of the ways that you can do it, and I'm very cognizant as a landlord myself, I'm very cognizant of cost. It's very expensive out there. Labor's through the roof, materials are through the roof, construction costs through the roof. So permits, everything, it's costly to do. And I get that. I'm mindful because a lot of landlords say to me, I just don't have that kind of money. And so they're always like, how do I strategize to maximize the money without losing too much while I try to get to the next level and, satiate the needs of the broader marketplace of in this case, we'll just call it a 4-bed, 2-bath. And so you can do a bifurcated lease. And we've done this many, many times successfully, where let's say you ask the tenants, hey, are you going to be away for 2 weeks? And they say, yes, in fact, we're all taking a vacation for 2 weeks, or maybe they're students and they're leaving for winter break and they're gone for 3 weeks. And so that gives a lot of time for a contractor to get right in there. We've already scheduled a bunch of these, where, the permit's already been pulled. The tenants have told us they're leaving December 14th at 3 o'clock. and the contractor wants to be in there at 4 o'clock, literally, or starting 8 a.m. the next day to begin that adding of that bathroom as an example. So now what I mean by a bifurcated lease is that the tenant has signed on at a lower price at the 5-bed or 4-bed, 1-bath. And when they go on vacation and they come back, the bathroom's been fully permitted. It's been signed off. It's working. Everything's beautiful. Let's say that happened and it's finished by, say, I don't know, January 15th. Well, maybe they have a clause in the lease that says on February 1st, they now pay a higher rent because that new bathroom was installed. So you have a lease that started with X price and then it goes to Y price based on that new bathroom being put in.
Signing on for a bifurcated lease means that you would offer or agree to have the tenant pay a lower rent at the beginning, and then over time, the rent would increase based on the work done in the apartment?
Correct.
I see.
Correct.
Have you heard from owners who have said that they wanted to go through the process of updating the unit, but they had a hard time because they couldn't find the right contractor, or that many builders and contractors were simply unavailable given the demand?
Yeah, this is a chronic problem in the greater Boston area, is finding a contractor. And then finding a contractor certainly around peak move-in and move-out dates are next to impossible. And so having that deep bullpen of relationships is certainly important. But figuring out how to schedule that and work with your tenants can be vital. And so really, build a good relationship with them and see what can be done and because your overall concessions sometimes work out to be way less than a vacancy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to kind of dollar cost that out. So it's good to get 3 quotes. It's good to talk with contractors and figure out when they could do it. And then also talk to your tenants and see if you could, match those. And so that will mitigate, vacancy. You may take some concessions for sure, but I think in the end, it works out a lot better for you.
When it comes to price reductions, a price reduction doesn't necessarily mean reducing your rent, but it could mean being flexible in other ways. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at Boston Pads and the nomenclature that we use for a price reduction, it can be a number of things, like throwing in a parking space for free is a price reduction, right? So the rent was still the same, but the landlord wanted to charge, $200 before it. He says, I'll throw that in. That's still a price reduction. A price reduction can be an assisting on move-in costs, right? So if it was first, last, and security, the landlord could say, I'm just going to take first and last, or I'm just going to take first and security. And so that we still consider that a price reduction, even though the rent price didn't go down, the move-in costs went down.
So you're helping the tenant by reducing the other upfront costs that they would have to consider, including having the owner pay the broker fee rather than the tenant to attract the tenant to lease the apartment.
We see a lot of landlords that would not take a pet before suddenly take a pet. And sometimes we consider that a price reduction. So,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times a landlord will say, well, look, if you bring me a dog, I'll take it, but for $200 more and, or $300 more, $100 more. And, they'll come back in August, saying, okay, you know what, I'll just take a dog. And so, you see a lot of these little subtle price reductions happening, as you get closer to September 1st. And then to draw upon your point, in terms of landlords paying the fee, the greatest number of landlords that you're going to see paying a fee are going to occur from mid-August all the way to about January. And then, to your point, you alluded to it earlier, you do have this, if the economy is doing well and corporate America's hiring and the venture capital is running, you'll see an uptick on some of those vacant apartments in January. But it's that little slice in there that you see from September to, the holidays that can be a little bit unnerving for landlords.
I see. And elsewhere in your piece, you talked about the possibility of selling a unit. When should a property owner consider that?
So we do a lot of math analysis for landlords, and so we're looking at a bunch of different factors. So I just went to a property the other day, and I walked through it, and the landlord's, should I sell it or should I renovate it? And now that can go all over the place, because sometimes you see massive opportunity and sometimes you see zero opportunity, right? And that, I think personally, walking through, like, what if I was a landlord and I had a vacant unit, and maybe I'm not a landlord that does it, as my full occupational job. Like, maybe I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I have a business, and it's not my core competency, and it's has rented for 5 years, and I had the same tenants in a 3-family for 7 years, 5 years, and 3 years. So I don't really know the marketplace, but for some reason, everybody moved out, or my rents are really low. There's opportunities to go through and say, well, if we reposition this asset and we figure out the maximum value, is that even worth putting in the money to get that rent money out? And in some cases, it's not. And that's probably when you might consider selling, because, and the margins might be so thin for the renovation of that asset in that specific neighborhood that it makes more sense for you to sell it at market price and maybe let a contractor pick it up that, would probably do it cheaper, because he or she's building in their own margin. And maybe that's, something small, like $50,000 or $100,000 on a bigger development of that property. And so it doesn't really make sense for the landlord to pay that, because they're paying that margin. And but it might make sense for a contractor to pick it up. So there are instances that it's just better to sell it, because if you're putting in, say, as an example, into a triple decker 500,000, but what you see putting in doesn't proportionally show an increase in rent that would cover that or make it profitable to recoup that money over a time period that the landlord feels comfortable with, then it might just be best to sell it.
So, Demetrios, when it comes to the micro neighborhoods in Boston where preventing vacancy after September 1st might be more of a challenge, can you talk a little bit about those places and what advice you have to offer?
Sure. So each neighborhood has about a 12-week peak cycle. And one of the things that you really want to look at is when most of those apartments are coming out. And if your lease cycles are off, the next time you rent your next tenant, you want to have your lease renewal notification date set to when the peak time of those apartments come out. So the conversation we're having today, if a landlord were to implement that, would probably happen in 2025, right? But they have to be cognizant of that and think about that and say, what is my neighborhood's peak lease renewal notification date happening? When is that traffic of most of the people looking there? And so that's easy to find if you have the real-time data. And Boston Pads posts every single micro neighborhood and shows those peak times. Now, it might be helpful to talk with a real estate agent to really understand what you're looking at and how to set that. Now, if let's say you're set in your ways and you want to have it at a certain time, May or June, or for whatever reason, then I think what it amounts to is that you need more frequent communication with either a real estate company or with real-time data to start setting your price and monitoring your price and making sure your price is accurate. Now, how do you do that? Well, you want to look at your competition, and each year the competition's different. So how do you understand your competition? Well, what we did at Boston Pads was we built a private property owner portal where the landlord can log in and they can see 30 different data points in their specific unit, their specific neighborhood, their specific price, and it can give them real-time comparative analysis so that they can say, there's 40 apartments that are just like mine, but my price is at 3,600, but the majority of them are at 3,400. Is mine worth $200 more than the average? Does that make sense? So you can look and set your own pricing in real time in our database. Conversely, if you looked and you were at 3,600 and there were two left, and you look at the other two and they look terrible, you could be quite confident and say, I can get 36 all day. I'll hold at this price, right? So, having access at your fingertip to a confluence of numbers in front of you can help you make real-time decisions so that you never get to a vacancy, right? So then it eliminates nearly everything. So you'll understand the real-time, vacancy rate in the neighborhood. You'll understand the real-time availability rate in the neighborhood. You'll know your competition. You can also see in our back end of our database, days on market for each specific area, neighborhood. And so you can then really start drilling down on what you believe is accurate pricing. Then when you fold in with talking with a few agents, boots on ground, I think that's helpful. So I think the only blind spot a landlord might have is whether or not they've gone to the property, because sometimes it's not the price, it's just the tenant. The tenants, decorated it terribly or left it, or they leave out pizza boxes, or they're messy. And we all know we've had messy tenants. And there's no recovery for a terrible showing. It's really hard. And then it comes down to the landlord or the property manager, somebody for sure, speaking with the tenants and saying, hey, could you keep the place a little bit nicer, because we've shown it 30 or 40 times, but if you kept it clean, it would probably rent in the first time. And I've had those conversations with tenants before, and they clean it up and then it rents in 1 second, and they were like, hey, why didn't you tell us to do this earlier?
Yeah, no, of
Okay.
course. And, this could be a conversation for another episode, but the technology that you're using, the portal, for example, that you mentioned, is incredible. And maybe we can have another conversation in the future about the importance of technology and how to use it to make these important decisions in real estate. And thinking about your response, perhaps it's not correct to generalize the micro neighborhoods themselves, because whether you're talking about, let's say, Back Bay or Fenway or the North End, the situation in 2024 could be very different in 2025 or 26. And that's why it's important to use the portal to find these numbers, to see what's going on at the given moment when you are faced with a vacancy and what to do about it. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. You can actually see on our website, you can see the inventory go up and the inventory go down. And when you're seeing that, that's like triple diamond inventory, ski slope inventory going down in a neighborhood. And if yours has been languishing for, I don't know, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, you might want to stop by your apartment and try to figure it out, if that makes sense, right? Conversely, if you're seeing no movement and nothing renting in that neighborhood, it might not be you, it might be broader market forces. So you can actually see how many units are renting in each specific neighborhood. So that's a tell, right? And so there's a lot of tells there. We have 30 different data points in there. How many dishwashers? Are the utilities included? What percentage of landlords are paying the fee? So it just requires like dialing in all those things, getting a clear picture, and then realizing, is it you or is it the apartment? Or is it the tenant? What is it? And then that certainly, I think, for most landlords, reduces decision fatigue. Another thing that a landlord can do too is send keys right away to reputable real estate offices. Like drop your keys off at a reputable real estate company with a proven track record and a good security policy for their keys, and the best technology practices for their keys, and the best storing of keys policies, and then have them there. Because it's sometimes, and landlords don't realize this until it's too late, the tenant has been blocking the entire time the other agents trying to show the property by giving a different excuse all the time as to why they can't come over. So you may have had the perfect tenants, you may have had the perfect apartment, but the tenant was blocking you from actually effectuating that. And by giving keys to to a reputable real estate company, it increases the probability of that property being shown and rented. And you especially want to do that certainly in the vacant season for sure. There's no reason why they shouldn't have keys given to the real estate agent. And I'll final on that. Most real estate agents are happy to drive and meet a landlord anywhere for a copy of keys, or go make the copies of the keys for the landlord for that reason, because they want to rent it as quickly as possible too.
No, those are very important points. Even if you have a good property manager, as the owner, you have to still go to the property, you have to check in, and you still have to keep a close eye on things to make sure you know what's going on. And if a tenant does end up blocking a potential showing, you just have to make sure that your lease has specific language addressing that issue, that the tenant cannot do that. I think most generic leases include that language, but that's just something to put out there. What do you think about, I mean, on the subject of technology, I know that some units in some buildings, there is no key. There's like a code that you punch into the door. How does that work? I mean, are there any tricky situations with that type of technology in a case like this?
Well, we implemented them at all of our properties. It's been an absolute game changer to let contractors in, give them codes that can expire in 1 hour, 2 hours. We just installed it in several buildings for different landlords. It makes it much easier to show, exactly who's going there, and then you can request feedback from that specific agent because you know that they went there and showed it. And so while there's some real positives to that. In other words, and this is probably another thing we could pack on to effective showings. Ask the tenants, ask the real estate agents for feedback. And I'm not saying demand it, but I'm saying almost demand it, right? Say, I would like to know, okay, you showed it 5 times. What did they say? Now it's far different if 4 or 5 of them said, hey, listen, they just don't like it because it's small, versus, we liked it. It was just a price issue. You might have changed your mind from last week and they were $100 off, right? A month. But this week you're like, I take that $100. You know what I mean? I take that $100. Right. So I think having good dialogue with agents, on what you would accept, and having like the access, and then knowing how many people showed it on on a screen for you, it's pretty awesome.
It is awesome. And I'm thinking too, as you know, recently, we were successful in our advocacy to change zoning to allow for ADUs, accessory dwelling units, the construction of in-law apartments. Given that flexibility, is it fair to say that it should be easier for property owners to make enhancements? I mean, not only in the area of creating more space, let's say using idle space in a building to create a new unit, but when it comes to the whole issue of, let's say, taking the pantry, as I think you mentioned in your article, and putting maybe another bedroom in there or something to that effect. I think that in the past, maybe that would have been more complicated depending on the building and where it was. But given that there's more flexibility now, or that there's going to be, should that be interpreted as a ray of hope that owners can be more flexible in enhancing their apartments more easily relative to the past?
It's a great question. I always go back to all supply is good. And I think that if we want to keep a young, vibrant city where we're keeping most of our graduates that graduate from these colleges that are really bright, we have to have the most innovative solutions to provide the most housing with the most options, which then drives down the price, because it's all about supply. So, absolutely champion any and all legislation that increases supplies on all fronts. And whether that is, ADUs, whether that's, affordable units, whether that's, and how we get there, of course, is a different answer altogether. But, adding as much supply as possible is the greatest, price reducing effect to our marketplace. We see it in real time in our database. It plays out. There's no emotions to a database. It shows exactly where the market is. And when you have more supply, you have more landlords paying fees, right? And so the price goes down. You have more landlords getting rid of last month's rent or getting rid of the security deposit. And so, there's no landlord, and I don't care what they say, there is no landlord in the world that wants to stay vacant for 1 month. Why would they? The taxes are high, energy costs are high, insurance is high. They can't withstand sitting vacant for a long period of time. And once you're vacant for 1 month, you can't recover that. It's not like you can catch up on that, right? 2 months, 3 months, you're vacant 3 months, your year's shot. There's no way you're gonna, reorganize your portfolio to catch up to where you were unless you did something dramatically to improve the apartment, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you're doing a vacancy with intention, meaning you told your tenants you're not going to renew because you've got planned obsolescence, that's different than kind of running into an unexpected vacancy. Mm-hmm. And so you have to take those factors into account. But going back to the supply part, I think we're going in the right direction. I think we've passed some policy that looks promising. I don't think we're there yet, though. I think we've got a ways to go. I think that our legislators can do a little bit better job in a few other things that I think if we effectuate, we can get more development done and more people can live and have and prosper in the greater Boston area.
Perhaps the technology that you've been talking about will help tremendously in hitting home the point to the legislature. If people have questions for you that were not addressed today, or more specific questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can reach me at d@bostonpads, just the letter D@bostonpads. You can write me an email anytime, and I'm always available. If a landlord wants to call for any strategic real estate advice, they can call my cell phone directly. They can also find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. Just find the funniest name you can possibly find on LinkedIn, and there I am, Demetrios, Demetrios. Last name Salpoglou, Salpoglou, and happy to connect there on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email, and we can go from there.
That sounds wonderful. I really appreciate this. This was valuable information. Ladies and gentlemen, next month we'll be back with another episode. Until then, my name is Amir Shahsavari, and I wish you well.